So here we go. So today's session is going to get into a little technical stuff, because we're going to talk about geometry becomes music, the golden section, proportions, and ratios. This is section class number 9, Geometry Becomes Music. This comes out of the book Sacred Geometry by Robert Lawler, The Philosophy and Practice of Sacred Geometry. This is a classic book. I keep mentioning that. If you can find it, definitely pick it up. It's a part of a whole series of books that I guess this group here, who is this? They published this book, Crossroads, New York. They have a whole series dealing with sacred dance, with martial arts, with meditation, with the Egyptian mysteries, the Kabbalah, the Tarot, astrology, dreams. They have a whole, maybe about 10 volumes on those different subjects. That's a whole series. So anyway, let's get into this. This is mediation. Geometry becomes music. It says, we have been considering the division of unity through both the idea of the root function. They're talking about square roots. And again, we're looking at music from its philosophical, metaphysical, principled basis that then will not only inform you relative to contemporary music, ancient music, but more than that, it actually illustrates cosmic harmony and the laws of creation. And you will see how the previous sessions on geometry and number are brought together through music or harmony, and how music is actually a function of number and geometry, arithmetic and number. But more so than that, we're going to get into some concepts that really, if you meditate on these concepts, can really provide you with some very clear understanding relative to the purpose of life, also relative to how to apply these concepts to resolve problems and to analyze conditions, which to me is even more important than just understanding how music is formed or created. So moving forward, and I said that because here it says, we've been considering the division of unity through both the idea of the root function. You have the generative root of 2 and the regenerative root of 5. Again, understand the key words. By keeping these key words in your mind, it then lets you understand the basic pattern. The basic pattern then gives you basic direction, ascending and descending, which then gives you clarity on other configurations, be it astrological, be it the Kabbalah, be it the concept of a higher and a lower world, a higher and lower universe, a higher and lower self. We talked about the chakras. You had a higher series of chakras, the top 3. You had a lower series of chakras, the bottom 4. When we talked about the beast being the lower self and 666, the numerical relationship to the 7 phases of man, etc. Again, you can start seeing how all these things are talking about the same thing, which then hopefully gives you a clearer perspective in changing how you see the world. And we're going to get into showing how you perceive the world is a function of the perceiver. Because when your perception changes, what you see changes. So anyway, moving forward. So we got both the idea of the root. So these are 2 ideas, right? The idea of the root or square roots, as well as through the idea of the 3 and 4 term proportions which results from them. So we're talking about the division of unity. or the oneness of all things. And so music is directly related to the division of unity. Remember last session we talked about if you take a single string and you divide that string into quarters, it gives you fourths, or the ratios of the fourths. And if you divide that string into thirds, it gives you the fifths. And then the notes that move between the octaves. And you have 7 key notes, but really you have 12 series of notes, including the sharps and the flats between octaves. And an octave is the relationship between 1 to 2. Because an octave is, you take the 1 and double it, you get a 2, and you start the next octave, or the next, well, the next scale, but the next octave. Holy people ain't looking at me like, huh? Yes. Right. And you wasn't here 2 weeks ago when we were breaking that down?
Yeah, I was here.
Did you read your material?
Yeah, I did.
Did you see this talked about in your material?
Yeah, I did.
And where was that at? Well, anyway. The fifth, now, and again, I am not a musician. Well, I am a musician, but I don't read music per se. But the understanding is that the relationship, what is it in terms of fifths? Let me go to my numbers here. I outlined this in my material. Right.
It's actually on the next page.
Right. Right. The fifths, see again we're talking about ratio, and a fifth is like 3 over 2. It's like 5, right? But I need Kitty here, right, to break down the fifths and the fourths.
I think they talk about
they talk about that too in the other piece, in the music. Hold on. So again, it talks about, from the handout, etymology of music, number considered a musical principle, page 98. It says the fundamental principles of B and F. Those are 2 different ends of the scale, B and F. Developing in inverse directions, going in opposite directions, either by fourths or fifth. That is, proceeding from 4 to 3 or from 3 to 2, produce 2 identical sets of tones. And so then the 4 to 3 are your fourths, and your 3 to 2 are your fifths. And basically, the relation, it's a numerical relationship. Now, exactly what it is, I need to do further research in terms of getting clear in my own mind exactly what it is. I know how it is produced.
They talk about it somewhere else than what we were looking at, really. It has to do with the intervals in between, something like that, and how they come together.
Right.
I saw that.
Let's see.
I think it's at the bottom of 98 there on the note. What's it, 89?
Says start on any note B and rising by successive fourths, obtained on the monochord by shortening the string by a quarter of its length each time. One finds the series B, E, A, D, G, C, F, B, flat, E flat, etc. Start on the same note F and rising by successive fifths, obtained by shortening the string by a third of its length each time, which is a ratio of 3 to 2. One finds the series F, C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp, etc. Only the first 7 tones of each series are identical. These form the diatonic scale. So the fourth and the fifth is a ratio. I need to get the actual mathematical calculation that defines it as a fifth. So it's a musical term that defines the division of a string into thirds that generates notes in a relationship that are equated with fifths. So that's all I can say at this point in time. So what we need to do is actually get a book on music, on, which I'll do between now and next week. But anyway, back to this. Okay, so we talked about the idea of 3 and 4 term proportions. And we talked about the square root of 2 and the square root of 5. The square root of 2 and the square root of 5 will actually generate a 3 and a 4 term proportion, which we'll talk about in a little while. It says, in this section, we will bring the idea of proportion and roots together so that their relationship can be thoroughly understood. At the same time, show how this resulting geometry becomes the basis for musical harmony. So then the basis of musical harmony is the relationship between proportions and roots. It talks about geometry as frozen music. Basically it says frozen because geometry is like numbers and shapes that you can see, where music is moving. The best approach to these objectives is by way of what is considered the cornerstone of ancient philosophical mathematics. Again, they're giving you keys because it says the cornerstone of ancient philosophical mathematics is the science of mediation. This is on mediation, geometry becomes music. Top of the second paragraph. Which is simple observation of the function of mean terms. So the mediation is the observation of the function of mean terms. The mean is the one that's in the middle. Now it says, using our discussion on the 3 and the 4 term proportions, which is on page 44 as a part of departure, let us take heed of Plato's warning that comparisons based on 4 elements, that is, discontinuous 4 term proportions, are of the nature of what is called particular knowledge. So particular knowledge is related to 4 term proportions, which we'll get into a 4 term proportion. 4 term proportion is like A is to B as C is to D. That's a 4 term proportion. A 3 term proportion is A is to B as B is to C. It's only 3 terms because defining 2 relationships. So then you have 3 terms defining 2 relationships. You have 4 terms defining 2 relationships. So then you're starting to get, and all of it is based upon the division of unity. So you got 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4 generates all of your 10. How do we do that? You know how we did that? When we did the tetracts? All right, everybody remember? You don't remember? The tetracts? Use the dots. Right, you add up all, if you have 1, 2, 3, and 4, a series of dots. If you add those dots up, you'll get 10. So 4 generates 10, which takes you back to 1, which is a completion. So anyway, okay. But I'm just trying to show you again how arithmetic and then geometry combine together to create music. And number is the foundation for all creation. Now I talked about particular knowledge is a function of 4, or 4 term proportion. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Which is of a vulnerable character, open to dispute and arbitrariness. Opposed to this is what he calls essential knowledge, which is not the simple accumulation of factual or even conceptual data pertaining to objects or phenomena, but rather consists of an awareness of the metaphysical constructs through which the mind is able to gain its comprehension. So it defines what essential knowledge is. And actually, essential knowledge is metaphysical understanding and particular knowledge is more of a exoteric or physical knowledge, because the character of the physical world is constantly changing. So if you base your knowledge on the physical appearance of a thing, well, what happens when the thing changes? Then the truth changes. You know, we started off talking about relative truth and absolute truth, which was talking about Christianity as defined by the contemporary Christian church, which really is a function. They define it based upon particular historical events, which constantly change, as opposed to really is talking about cosmic reality. But anyway, and it's going to get into even talking about the logos and the word and the Son of God concept. The laws which govern the creation of things, this is key. The laws which govern the creation of things are the same laws as those which allow for their comprehension. So then when it says, man, know thyself, and by knowing yourself, you know the universe. Because the same laws that govern you govern the universe. So if you understand yourself, you can understand the universe. When I say you understand yourself, that means you understand the inner part of yourself, not the outer part of yourself. But what is the laws upon which yourself operate, as opposed to just observing what you do. It says again, the laws which govern the creation of things are the same laws as those which allow for their comprehension. And essential knowledge is an understanding of these laws. That's why meditation becomes so important, because by going into a deep state of meditation, one can really get in tune with the governing principles of themselves, which is a reflection of the universe, which thusly they can know the universe by knowing themselves. That's interesting when we were talking about the dance last Saturday, right? And we were talking about the whole goal of the dance is to get beyond doing the step to where you become the step. And by becoming the step, then you unite with the meaning of the step, and then you actually get a higher understanding or higher knowledge. Plus, once you get there, then you can create new steps, because you unite with the essence of the step and can then express yourself from the essence. And by expressing yourself from the essence, you create new movement. Which is true for all disciplines. So whatever the discipline you're in, if it's management, if it's like golf or sports or engineering or medicine or teaching or whatever it is, the goal is to get beyond the physical act itself and move to the essence behind the act. When you get into the essence or the purpose behind the act, then you connect to a higher reality that then brings great creativity. Anyway, so it says, such knowledge or essential knowledge can be gained, Plato says, through the study of mediation, which is the binding of two extremes by a single mean term. Now remember when we were going over, hopefully you remember when we were going over the two types of learning. When we gave a handout and talked about the two types of learning. And two types of knowing. One was based upon the lower mind, and one was based upon the higher mind. And so the one based upon the lower mind was what? How the highest knowledge gained from the lower mind? That was a handout that was probably, 2 sessions ago, dealing more with probably a series on astronomy. And it may have been even in the series on number. But anyway, because we were talking about the higher mind and the lower mind, and how you learn from the lower mind, how you learn from the higher mind. I know in your handouts you have that handout. And the reason I bring this up, because it's important for you to be able to start linking this information together, because you have to bring knowledge to this knowledge to understand it. If you don't bring anything to it, you're not going to understand it. That's why I'm trying to give you all these various points of views, so that when certain key words pop up, they should connect to certain key ideas, and then that key idea helps you decipher what they're talking about. It also reinforces the other ideas and concepts. So anyway, the two means was the lower mind basically gained knowledge, again, from the five senses. It was more of a linear object external relationship. It was linear. It was one-sided. Where the higher mind gained knowledge through the dialectical process, which was, the dialectical process said there's always two sides of the situation. And only by seeing both sides of the situation can you come to a real understanding of the situation. And then we use the analogy of, like, to look at black folks in terms of just what we are doing. They say, oh, they're robbing something. So thusly, robbing is bad, so they're bad. As opposed to looking at the other side of the situation in terms of, why are they robbing? Then if you start looking at why they're robbing, then you get into a whole another series of situations that are socially and historically induced, that then bring you to a different conclusion. So one is linear, one-sided, which is the way the European, this particular world looks at things, and the other is dialectical, which then also would go and reinforce when we talk about the mark of the beast. Because if the mark of the beast is dealing with the lower self, and the lower self looks at the world through these particular ways, then all those that look at the world through that particular way are following the beast, or have the mark of the beast. Anyway, look through your notes and try to find that handout. So back here it says, mediation is the binding of two extremes, and this is the way one comes to essential knowledge, which is basically a dialectical process, which is interesting because the last of the seven disciplines in the seven liberal arts and sciences is what? Is what? Logic or dialectics. So then by you going through and understanding number, geometry, astronomy, music, you then move into rhetoric, which deals with the word, which is already being developed in music because the word is based upon vibration. So then you get actually into how the spoken word and the formation of words and what they're related to, which is also based upon number, which is also based upon astronomy, because the various positions of the celestial bodies became the first reference point for language. So then from rhetoric you go into grammar, which is the written word, which really deals with symbolism, which deals with archetypes, which then goes back into geometry, patterns, number, and astronomy. And then you arrive at logic. But what exactly talking about logic is the dialectical understanding between two concepts, of looking at the thing from a whole position, which is basically looking at phenomena relative to its relationship to cosmic law, which then became the basis for justice, which was the foundation of Ma'at, because Ma'at is what? Reciprocity. What's reciprocity? It's dialectics. So you can actually start seeing how all of the various mythological, legendary, religious images and symbolisms are actually expression of the seven liberal arts and sciences, which is really a unity, because the same laws that govern all created things are the same laws that allow for comprehension. And so if everything has an inverse to it, the way you arrive at something can also be the way that you get out of it. Okay, there's a lot there. Just think about what I'm saying. So moving on. So we say, we have seen the example of this involving ratios made up of 3 terms. So A is to B as B is to C. There's 3 terms, which we call the geometric proportion, and the Greeks call logos. All right? Now where did the King James Version of the Bible come out of? The Greek translation of the Bible. So now, in the Greek, came out of the Kemetic. So now you're starting to see key words to help you really understand what they mean by the logos. Logos is actually a geometrical term.
That's interesting, because this is like, you talk about how the objective is to reconcile your positive, the 2 aspects of yourself.
Right.
And what you're trying to do is, so you may want to call it A and C, for instance.
Right.
But you can't do it. A to C is like what you're talking about, this linear thing, that's that polarity thing.
Right.
But A to B and B to C, that's that trinity.
Right.
And what you're trying to do is get your consciousness up into a beat, basically. And that's that whole thing.
Now go back. Now what that triggers is the handout on the 7-fold constitution of humans. Because on the side of the 7-fold constitution of humans was 3 terms. What were they? It was 3 terms. It was, right, spirit, soul, and body. So now, spirit, soul, body. So body is matter, and spirit is the 2 poles. And the intermediary or the mediating factor is soul. Now you go back and what was the purpose? We started with this whole, the context of this whole presentation is come out of Stolen Legacy. And the first page of Stolen Legacy says that the first system of salvation was the system of the mysteries whose goal was to liberate the soul from imprisonment in the body through the disciplines of the arts and sciences and the practicing of the virtues. And then we went into the key was magic. See where I'm going? Can you follow where I'm going? Because how is magic related to what I'm talking about? In the context of what Dana was just talking about, in the context of the 3 terms.
So how would you define magic?
How do we define magic? You've been here all the time and you haven't got the definition of it yet?
It's 101.
Magic is defined as the qualities of entities, human and divine, are distributed throughout their parts. And contact with such entities releases those qualities. So, the soul is the divine in you. So by contacting the soul, you release those qualities. So if the soul is the divine in you, by contacting your soul, you release the qualities of divinity. And the soul is the mediating factor between the physical and the metaphysical, or the physical and the spiritual. And then if we go back to the 3, 4, 5 triangle, right, see all this stuff is giving you answers. The spiritual, the 3 was the spiritual, the 4 was the physical, and the hypotenuse was the product of the 2. which was Heru, Osiris or Asar, and Aset or Isis, and the birth from the two was Heru. Heru is the resurrection of Osiris, which is spirit resurrected in consciousness. So the goal is to evolve Christ, Heru, cosmic consciousness is the whole purpose. And it's a geometrical fact. Right here. You can do it mathematically. They go and actually start showing you mathematically how a three-term proportion can be the only proportion that divides unity in a balanced, harmonic way. Any other proportion will not give you a balanced, harmonic ratio that eventually does not progressively replicate itself. Which actually a three-term proportion is what they call the golden section, or the golden proportion, golden section, which was the foundation for the construction of all your major monuments and art forms in Kemetic civilization, and is the foundation for the creation of all forms that are organically developed in nature. All this stuff is just related. So it's actually music. Miraculous.
Yeah, that is.
Right. Which means you're music. Because how you actually, your cells, how you evolve and grow, how your mind functions, is all in accord with these cosmic laws. So then a society or a civilization or institutions that operate in discord to those create dissidence or disease, which then ends in death and destruction, which then dictates those who are wise submit to Allah, God, which is harmony, as the basis of their logic, their truth, their justice, and all such things. On to that. We say, but this simple example is not the only three-term proportion, and the science of mediation explores all the proportional statements possible between three terms, not only through a direct proportional relationship, but also through the play of difference. A mediating proportion can be defined as a group of three unequal numbers, such that two of their differences are to each other in the same relationship as one of these three numbers is to itself, or to one of the other two numbers. You know, we always had various heavy problems with word problems in school. That was probably our most difficult part of mathematics, was word problems. And usually we got mixed up in word problems because we tried to understand the word problem as a total statement, as opposed to going back and breaking down each segment of the statement and then looking at the relationship to the segments. Because usually if you read it piece by piece, it outlines what it's talking about. But if you try to like understand the whole thing, you can't understand the whole thing. So it says, a group of three unequal numbers such that two of their differences. So you got three unequal numbers such that two of their differences, and differences relate to what? Right. Are to each other. So two of their differences are to each other in the same relationship. Now we're over here. In the same relationship as one of these numbers is to itself or to one of the other two numbers. So you're getting a ratio, right? You're getting a statement over here that is the same relationship to the statement over here. So you're getting a relationship or a ratio. Okay, so this strange mathematical koan contains the formula for the three major mediums: the arithmetic medium, the geometric medium, and the harmonic medium. So in another sense, arithmetic, geometry, and harmony actually is a trinity, and really you could move astronomy over to astronomy, rhetoric, grammar, and logic, or dialectics. Because in actuality, astronomy is a function of arithmetic, geometry, and harmony. Because you're dealing with planets that are operating in a certain relationship to one another. You're talking about planets that are made up of certain atomical structures that are then attracted to each other because of the electron, relationship, and create the molecules, it creates the structures, etc., 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 which is all mathematical, geometrical, and harmonic. So anyway, I don't want to continue with that. I'm trying to give you some other keys to it. So let's go through this definition of three medians step by step. A median proportion is formed from a group of any three numbers with their A greater than B and B greater than C. And let you see how you write it. A is greater than B and B is greater than C, such that two of their differences, that is, A minus B, this is one difference, and B minus C, this is the second difference, are to each other. So two of their differences are to each other. A minus B is to B minus C. In the same way as one of these numbers is to itself. A minus B is to B minus C as A is to A as B is to B. And C is to C, etc. Or as one of these numbers is to one of the other numbers. So it took that definition up front and broke it down for you, right? So as one of these numbers is to one of the other two. So as A minus B is to B minus C as A is to B, or A minus B is to B minus C as A is to C. So it's giving you these various combinations that can be formed by three numbers in a ratio to each other, where A is larger than B and B is larger than C. Anyway, we go into mathematics, and if you don't understand all the intricacies, go home and study. But also, think about the basic concepts. If you get confused with all the little details, focusing on the major concepts. The 3 pattern, the 4 patterns, etc. Because that still can give you an understanding of what the bigger, picture is. If you really want to develop essential knowledge, you got to study this stuff where you can really try to understand what they're really talking about. Because then you can apply it to other things. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm talking about the 3 pattern and 4 pattern, stretching into the example, spirit is A, soul is B, and body is C, with soul being mediation. Using the 4 pattern, what would be the 4th concept?
It probably is dealing with the 4 elements of fire, air, earth, and water. So then, one will be earth, one will be body, emotions, mind, and intuitive, which is like related to fire. The intuitive nature, because intuitive function is actually your intuition is the voice of the soul. Which also gives you some clues here. Because the soul is that divine in you, and intuition is the voice of the soul. What's it saying about your intuition? But most people don't listen or even accept their intuition as being real. If you can relate to that, there's probably good books. Probably a good book would be The Science of Meditation and Science of Becoming Oneself by Sarah Darian. He gets into talking about that. There's probably a number of other books that you can get into talking about. We're really just going to talk about, if you have the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, and because the intuitive plane on the 7-fold constitution of humans is the Buddhic plane. So then if you can start looking into the Sanskrit terms for the Buddhic and the Buddhic, what it's talking about. In actuality, the intuitive function is a higher emotional function. Because everything on the lower is reflected on the higher. So your physical is reflected on the higher, your emotional is reflected on the higher, and the mental is reflected on the higher. So the physical reflected on the higher is abstract thinking. Because abstract thinking is understanding the deeper implications of physical things. Your emotional level is reflected in the intuitive level, because emotion, you feel stuff. From the lower level, it's based upon, usually like envy, jealousy, or whatever, right? On the lower, but on the higher level, it's really operating in its higher capacity. And then the mental is really related to, on the higher level, the lower will, on the higher level, is the divine will. So again, you get the duality, right? The whole divided into two. Gives you those two reflections of each other. So everything on the lower is a reflection of things on the higher, and vice versa. So anyway, give me some more clues. Let's continue on. So the question was about the four terms, right? So in case one, the expression when solved for the mean term B, right? The mean term is a middle term or the common term, becomes B equals A plus C divided by 2. And I'm going to go through this quickly, and then you can they'll give you more examples to break it down. Again, don't get all caught up in it. Just try to understand the concept of it, because then that's leading us to someplace else. And you always can go back and then start doing your mathematics. So which is the general formula for a arithmetic proportion. 5, 3, 5, 7. Is an arithmetic progression with the arithmetic mean equaling what? 5. There's 3, 5, 7. The median term, or the mean term, is 5. That's the one in the middle. And if you look at it, 3 is the 5 as 5 is the 7. 2 is the difference between both of them. In case 2, the expression when solved for the mean term B becomes B squared equals A times C, or B equals the square root of AC, which is the general formula for a geometric proportion for a 16. Is a geometric progression with the geometrical mean B equals 8. So 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 8 is 16, 2 times 16 is 32, etc. So between any three terms, you will have a common relationship. So again, they're talking about a arithmetic proportion gives you a arithmetic progression. So you have proportion and progression. I want you to kind of remember those two terms, because they're going to start showing you some things on proportion and progression. Because you have a generative progression and a regenerative progression. So you can have an involution and an evolution, or evolution and a devolution. So one can be toward growth and development, and the other one can be toward deterioration and death. In case 3, the mean term B is then B equals 2 times AC divided by A plus C. Now this is the general formula for the harmonic proportion 2, 3, 6. Is a harmonic progression with the harmonic mean B equals 3. A statement of mediation gives us then the general formula for all our basic mathematical operations. This is a heavy statement, because it says the statement of mediation gives us then the general formula for all of our basic mathematical operations. So all basic mathematics comes out of these three, the concept of the median, or mediation. So it says the arithmetic proportion contains the law for addition and its inverse, subtraction. So also you start seeing how mathematics is again based upon cosmic law, because everything has an inverse or an opposite. You also can see how the ancients started to develop these concepts by understanding how the universe operated. And see, everything has an inverse to it on the opposite side. So if you add something, the opposite is take it away. Or if you multiply something, you divide it. So it becomes the foundation for the development of mathematics. Originally, mathematics was really based upon observation of things, and then after they observe things in a tangible form, they then start to understand the principle behind it, as opposed to sitting down just meditating and coming up with a principle. It really was the reverse. So it says that one critically observes phenomena and looks deeply, one can see the operation of certain principles. by the repetition of pattern. So you can look at history, you can look at what's going on in the community, you can look at what's going on in the media, and start observing the repetition of certain patterns and understand the principles that are being operated. Again, understanding the repetition of a pattern, not necessarily the external clothing, because it's a ratio or relationship between things. One of the first things I used to always tell my kids was, we go to the movies, watch the black man get killed first. That's a pattern. Now he might be in the military, he might be in the army, he might be in a street gang, he might be in a science fiction spaceship, they might be in a monster movie, but the same relationship always exists. The black people are always under the jurisdiction of some white person. So whether it's the mind and functions of relationships and proportions, what is that doing in conditioning thinking? It then creates a relationship that you have with the world. And so when you come into a situation, subconsciously, you place yourself in the appropriate relationship. So if you want to change the relationship, you must change the impressions that's going into the mind, how it's perceiving reality.
Attraction, because it's attractive as well.
Right. So,
When they try to take this talk about the abstract thinking and further,
well, not abstract
I want to talk
thinking,
about abstract thinking and further.
right.
And then we have the harmonic, which is the holistic.
So you're saying abstract thinking, holistic thinking is the same thing. Well, again, you're defining, you're connecting the term abstract thinking to a particular personality, how they define it, as opposed to how you define abstract thinking. You say abstract thinking is the higher mind. Then you look at the greater concept or the principle of the thing. You're dealing with art or music or poetry or whatever. You're trying to move to the essence of a thing, as opposed to just commenting on the external, how something looks, how it walks, or how it talks, relative, you know. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not agreeing upon how you define holistic and abstract. I'm saying holistic from my perspective. I'm saying metaphysics as abstract thinking means think dialectically. That means you go beyond the relative truth and deal with the absolute relationship of the thing. But the logic is relative to your reference point. The thing is logical relative to the reference point. So if I'm going up in the hood and my reference point is street life and gangsterism, it's logical when somebody comes at me and says, wait, you need something. It's logical from their reference point. If I'm coming from the reference point of white supremacy, it's logical to practice genocide. From my reference point, it's logical and justifiable from my logic. But when you raise it to an abstract level, you take out the personality and look at it from pure cosmic truth, then it's a whole other thing. which is deal with the Aquarian perspective, cosmic law. So we're interpreting like religions are really based upon metaphysical principles which are cosmic and absolute, but they've been clothed in the personality of the culture that defines it. So then it becomes relative. That's why people get confused, because you have an absolute truth being interpreted from a relative. But behind the relative concept are these cosmic principles. So we say, that stuff is really, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but how you interpret this from your frame of reference or your logic is tied to a specific historical period of time interpretation, which then changes. It changes the logic of it. That's why you can have people in slavery and use Christianity to keep them docile in slavery in terms of how you interpret these ideas of concept. Anyway, so I'm not, when you start talking about Homer against Plato, so that's probably a battle that went on between two personalities relative to whatever. I'm not that familiar with their particular interaction. Basically, what we're talking about here is a lot of the concepts that we're talking about that come from Plato and Pythagoras and Aristotle. The core of those ideas are Kemetic. And because a lot of the Kemetic teachings were oral traditions or encoded, in hieroglyphics and those kinds of things, and the Greeks took out a lot, where they really encountered, took out a lot of the mythological side of it, just putting it to their own particular orientation, coming out of the snow, closed pineal gland, they look at it in a certain perspective, and so that's how they related to it. So then, you have to then, it's like you came from here down to here, you can go from here back up to there. From his frame of reference. Right. So the key here is the frame of reference. That's really anything is the frame of reference in a relationship. Because a relationship is a three factor. When we talk about relationships, to have a relationship, you have to have a third factor. So what is the common agreement between the two that creates a relationship? It can be whatever. See, a lot of times in relationships, to make a relationship function, you have to have commonly agreed upon frame of reference. Because that becomes the basis of your understanding. So a lot of times you come into a relationship and the words mean different things to different people. But you're speaking these words. So you say, I love you, y'all, I love you too. But what love means to me and what love means to you may be two different things. And we can sit down and define what does love mean to us, which most people do not do. And so you have all these relationships that really become dysfunctional because they're really not based upon a commonly held frame of reference and commonly held value. So the first thing you're supposed to do is sit down and come from common understanding of what do you mean by faithful, whatever. How do you see husband, wife, man, woman, or then you understand how they grew up. Because how they grew up, you can also define the experience to the term and how they can relate to the term. So anyway, so again, I'm trying to also show you, we're talking about proportion, three-term proportion, and our three-term proportion can be used as a methodology to create a harmonious relationship. Because it's like, if I'm A and she's C, what's our common B? We need to establish our common B. In past times, the culture finds that common third factor, because that was a common thing in the context from which we operate. But this society, family, I grew up in one family, you grew up in another family, and everybody got these different understandings. We come together, and the common factor is not there. It's also the reason why African people can't get
become unified, where other cultures can, because of their cultural continuity, they have a common third factor. But when we come together, I ain't no African, I'm from Mississippi, or I'm from Louisiana, or I'm from Texas, or, I'm Jones, I'm this or that, so I'm Baptist, I'm Muslim, and I'm, whatever. So we got a good core and third factor. We would never be able to create a harmonious relationship. And ideally, the whole Afrocentric issue is to go back to our core understanding before we were polluted and come to some common accepted understanding. Because it was quantum, we thought it had to be a common basic value system that everybody could agree on. That could become a common third factor. So, of course, we now go back to that one way, a black business, blah, 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 blah. Anyway. So, that was great. Okay, so we are down to the geometric proportion. The arithmetic proportion contains the law for addition and is inverse subtraction, and describe the relationship that gives a natural series of cardinal numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. So that's arithmetic proportion. Gives you a natural series of cardinal numbers. The geometric proportion contains the law of multiplication and is inversion division, and describes the relationship that gives any series of geometric progression. As we have said, addition and multiplication are mathematical symbols for growth, for patterns of growth. The harmonic mean is derived from a combination of the first two. It is formed by multiplication of any two extremes, A and C, two extremes in the point of the pattern, followed by the division of this product by their average or arithmetic mean. So A plus B divided by 2. So it's actually showing you how these formulas actually express mathematical and cosmic concepts. So how mathematics is actually the expression of cosmic principles applied to numerical quantities and relationships, ratios, etc. For example, given two extremes, 6 and 12, the product of 6 and 12 equals 72. The arithmetic mean between 6 and 12 is 9. And 72 divided by 9 equals 8. So 6, 8, 12 is a harmonic proportion. It doesn't come immediately. You have to go back through it, use a piece of paper, and work it out. Look, you have to go back through all the other cases and see the arithmetic proportion, the geometric proportion, the harmonic proportion, do these and look at the numbers and see where they're coming into clarity. So give you the formula about the arithmetic, the geometric, and the harmonic. Each proportion has a number of characteristics which are peculiar to it. For example, the arithmetic proportion shows an equality of difference, but an inequality of ratio. Here's the example. So in the arithmetic proportion, 3, 5, 7, 7 minus 5 equals 5 minus 3, right? Because the difference is 2. So they're equal. But 7 divided by 5 does not equal 5 divided by 3. So you have an equality of difference. They're different based upon 2. So they're equal based upon an equality of difference, but an equality of ratio. Their ratios are not the same. So in the arithmetic proportion, you have an equality of difference with inequality of ratio. In the geometric proportion, it's characterized by an equality of ratio but an inequality of difference. So if you have a geometric proportion 2, 4, 8, 4 divided by 2 equals 8 divided by 4 because it both equals 2. But 4 minus 8 doesn't equal 4 minus 2. So it shows that the arithmetic proportion and the geometric proportion are inverse to each other. They're opposites. So then if you then have a unity of opposites, you're going to have harmony, which is your harmonic. The most important and mysterious character of a harmonic proportion is the fact that the inverse of every harmonic progression is an arithmetic progression. Thus, 2, 3, 4, 5 is an ascending arithmetic progression, while the inverse series, 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, is a descending harmonic progression. Now, here we come to the whole issue. In music, it is the insertion of the harmonic and the arithmetic mean between the two extremes in double ratio, representing the octave double. Remember we talked about last series about how if you have the fourth, you have the B and the F, and you divide the string into quarters or fourths, the time it takes you to move from the B to the F or the two extremes of the scale. And on the second string, you divide it into fifths, or the third into the fifths. It's going to take you longer to travel the fifth than the fourth, but they will meet up on the same character in the center. Remember, we have the sheet on the etymology of music. It showed the two scales and how the middle note was common. So basically it shows the musical octaves or musical ascending, descending scales on the fourth and the fifth, the same mathematical, geometrical proportion. So it's showing you how music is mathematical and the universe is mathematical, so the universe is musical. And so music is geometry. So all things are music. Which is all things vibration, all things are harmonic. And then if you go back further, and when we're going into the book, Sacred Science. Remember the handout was given on Sacred Science, and it dealt with cosmic ambient and harmony, and how things that involve are expressions of the ambient of the environment. And that the ambient of the environment creates the forms, because the forms have to form themselves in harmony with the environment. So if you want to understand a thing, understand its environment, and you will understand that thing. Because the nature of the universe is that the physical will take on the form of the environment in which it exists. Because it's based upon harmonics. If you do not, I won't say well-versed or remember that, in here, get your handouts. I don't know if we have handouts over there on or not. If we have handouts on there. So handouts over there on the table that's dealing with the whole thing about cosmic ambient and the whole principle of harmony. And another piece that is the book Egyptian Miracles, The Wisdom of the Temple by Swallow Lubick. And there's a chapter in here on harmony, analogy, functions, and factors. And it goes into harmonics. Then it starts, and then he has another book called Alchemy, which is really a book that was written by one of his students that was trying to get him to take him on as a student and change he went through. But he has some charts in his book. And in that chart, he breaks down the evolution or the development of the five senses from the cosmic division of the universe into polarity. And the polarity in the three modes of operation into the four elements. And the four elements creating the physical world, which then the human form responded to the four elements by creating the senses in response to the stimulation of fire, air, earth, and water. So our eyes develop out of the stimulation of light. The sense of touch by the physical form. Hearing through vibration in the air. Taste by consumption of foods. All of this is evolving, trying to create a greater capacity to experience so that you can know. And through knowing, eventually come to an awareness or consciousness of who you really are. So behind everything is the drive to understand and know divinity, which took us back to the moon. There was a piece I wanted to hand out too, which you probably will not get to tonight. Yes, sir.
Positive and negative. Higher forms of thought and that, my understanding is that thought comes from light, and light goes down and turns to an electron, and the electron turns to an electromagnetic field, which is positive and negative.
Well, we have light. First you have light. And light is then based upon some kind of particle, the neutrons and protons. Neutrons and protons then create atoms. Atoms then create molecules. Molecules then created substance. It's all substance based upon molecules, and molecules based upon atoms. Atoms are based upon positive, negative, protons, electrons, neutrons, and that's really the nature of light or pure energy. So pure energy is the substance by which all things are expressing it. So you say it's a higher form of knowing than what? Absolutely.
Is this something we will be God, doing things and decide things?
Sure. Just seeing things as one. Because the ultimate knowing is once you move to a level of cosmic understanding, you will see everything in relationship to the one. Because everything is a function of the one. So now what is this relationship to the one? See, everything again came out of the noon, right? And from out of the noon you had the Ta, which is the essence, and then you had Atum. Simultaneously you had Atum, which was the one, the creator. And Atum then created all things by naming the parts of itself, which means the thing was already existed, and only by naming it, and by naming it means you identify it, did it become a reality, because you perceive it. But behind everything already exists. Everything already exists. Everything already is. It's just our understanding of it is not. So once you elevate your consciousness to the absolute, then you know, because you become it. So when you came in contact with something, you automatically understand it. Because you would register it in relationship to the one, automatically. Actually, intuitive understanding is just the processing of all kinds of information simultaneously. Is what intuition is. And once you move into that state, the processing will become instantaneous. And so it would reflect in your consciousness, it's just knowing. So the only thing that separates you from that is your own level of consciousness, where you operate from. Intuitive knowing? Right. That's right. Yeah, you walk outside the door and something tells you to turn right where your car is left. Something just tells you to go. Now if you go right, time you turn right, a car jumps over the curb and smashes into your car. Your conscious mind comes and intervenes and says, well, my car's over here, I don't need to be going right. And you walk over there and get in your car and bam, you're in an accident. And you're saying, wow, I knew that. Why, I knew that.
That's a good instance, like, he's talking about what all the time. I've been trying to shed the consciousness, be able to hear that voice.
Mm-hmm.
What's a good meditation? What's a good focus on? That will allow us to.
First thing you got to learn to be able to calm your mind. It's not guided by your physical body, your emotional body, and your thinking mind. And that's just practice. And sometimes different people need different techniques depending on their nature. Some people, can just sit down and concentrate on breathing and go into a real calm state. Other people, because of their nature, need to focus in on something. You can get a candle, focusing your mind on looking at the candle, you might get a rose or flowers. Some people just get music. The music becomes a way to go beyond the physical and emotional body. Other people may have to do something physical. You can actually get into going to synchronizing breathing with your movement, and then it enables you to concentrate on your movement, but your movement is synchronized with your breathing. It actually puts you into what you're breathing. And as you slow your movement down more and more, you slow your breathing down. And as you slow your breathing down, your mind becomes calmer and calmer, and eventually you can go into a very meditative state. So each person has to really find that particular way that's best for them. And it's usually you have to, try that, it don't work, try that, try this. Or, various things like that. It's the number one thing. And then also, you have to consistency. So initially, you're going to be developed, you're going to practice it different, you be consistent. Consistency starts to burn a neural path in your brain where it becomes easier and easier for you to do it. And then also, if it's difficult for you, the more you learn about it or know about it, also, maybe we should go deep into it. It can be where you just start taking a walk and just get into a real calm walking situation, observing nature, flower, whatever, and start you off. The whole thing, you just want to go into a meditative state, But once you go into a meditative state, the issue is the spiritual part of your soul or higher mind is always there. So what you want to do is you want to retreat from your focus in the outer world. If you retreat, you will automatically be left with your inner self. Okay, so you can't storm the gates of heaven. You can't force it. It's not about forcing it. It's about releasing it. That's why when we say we do meditation, so I left foot forward, because the left side is the kingdom side and the receptive side. It's about receptivity. If you see something, you have to empty yourself to be able to get something in. Okay, moving on. Okay, so it says, in other words, the arithmetic and harmonic means between the double geometrical ratios are the numerical ratios which correspond to the tonal intervals of the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. The basic consonances in nearly all musical scales. So again, we talk about the strings and play the strings and the arithmetic and geometrical progressions and how their mean point then creates those ratios which correspond to the various tones. And that's when we talk about the fifth, and the tones between the fifth, the tones between the fourth, and the octaves, and the different scales and that type of thing. So it just kind of gives you the mathematical basis for that. So the basic proportional structure which contains the actions for our primary mathematical operations is also the basic proportional structure for the laws of music. It's telling you basic proportional structure for mathematical operation is the same proportional structure for music. It also would tell you that African people are mathematical geniuses because they have a natural propensity for music. But because of the way society looks at things in a linear way, they don't let people understand that music is mathematics. So thusly, why do you fear you should fear mathematics? Because it's nothing but music. So again, logic is perspective. And if we can change our perspective, then we can change the whole way we relate to things around us that are now obstacles. Obstacles will actually become stepping stone for our own salvation. It's all attitude. You change your attitude, the whole world changes. You know, you can deal with a kid a lot of times. A kid might be a genius because of his attitude, and end up in jail. I did a lot of stuff with youth, had great natural talent. Because of their attitude, they went a whole different direction. They couldn't even see it. And that was a product of their condition. The progression 1, 4, 3, 3, 2, and 2 represents the frequencies of a fundamental 4, 5th, and octave. So the 1 is the first octave, 4, 3 is the 4th, 3, 2 is the 5th, and the 2 will push you to the second octave. When we find the arithmetic and harmonic proportion between the string lengths of 1 and 1/2, representing the division of the vibrating string in half, which produces the octave increasing of frequency. So basically, you cut the string in half, you double the frequency, you create an octave. This gives a progression 1, 3, 4, 2/3, 1/2, because the harmonic mean between 1 and 1/2 equals 2/3 is the musical fifth, and the arithmetic mean between 1 and 1/2 is 3/4, the musical fourth. So it kind of goes back to equal. In comparing these two progressions, we see an inversion of ratio and a crossing of functional positions between the arithmetic and harmonic mean. And also, if you get sacred geometry and you go back into the beginning chapters of it, which I wanted to get into, but then we've been going back into as much stuff we kind of covered, and there's a whole chapter in here dealing with the crossing, the primal act, the vision of unity, and how anything could come into manifestation based upon a crossing. Because it's like two birds. And then we talk about the moon and how the path came out of the moon. He had to cross out of non-manifestation into manifestation. But within the moon, this is Memphite theology, being stolen legacy. And the moon existed, pre-creation existed in the moon. So all that is already was, had just been identified. Which also means the solution to our social condition already exists. Our perception of the world hides it from us. It also means that the solution to problems you face as an individual are solutions are resident right there in the problem. It's the way you look at the problem that keeps you from perceiving the solution. Right. It's cosmic law. It cannot even be in existence if it's not operating as a function of harmony. Because even the current conditions that we are in are following cosmic laws. Is that what it says? What does it say? The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the exams of those they oppress. And we allow oppression. Let's kind of finish up here. It says, the mystery of musical harmony, which develops out of a simultaneous inversion, also contains a simultaneity of addition and multiplication. Now, remember, all of this is coming out of stolen legacy, talks about Memphite theology. And then you can really start understanding the Memphite theology scenario in terms of when in the moon existed, pre-creation existed in the moon. So in actuality, creation is a reflection of the pre-existence in the moon. Hatai evolved or came out of the moon but it was the heart and tongue, or the essence of the pre-creation in the moon. Simultaneously, our tunes set on top of the top. And then the inversion, our tune caused creation to come into being by naming 8 parts of itself. In the noon existed 4 pairs of pre-creation entities. And then, I'm just trying to show you how these philosophical, mathematical concepts are reflected in the cosmological legends, mythology of ancient people. But because how we look at the terminology, we misinterpret what was really being projected. I don't know if you can see what I'm saying. I think it's just like, feels like, if you don't understand what I'm saying, review this and go back and just go to literature and review the Memphite theology. Because the Memphite theology and Octave created the great Inner, which was the 9, which is the foundation of numbers, or arithmetic progression. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Once you get to 9, you go to 10, which is 1. You start all over again. So 11 is 2, 12 is 3, 13 is 4, 14 is 5, etc. 20 is 2, 21 is 3, 22 is 4. It all goes back to the prime 9, which was the Enad, which was created out of the tune naming the part of itself, which was pre-existent in the noon because there were 8 pairs or 4 pairs of pre-existent so-called gods or principles, and Ptah was created in 9. So mathematically you have different octaves and inversion, multiplication and addition, etc. The above table expresses, it says, the octave of a fundamental is achieved by the addition of the intervals. In string length, the 5th plus the 4th equals the octave, and also the multiplication of the vibrational frequencies of the 4th and the 5th equals the octave. 4 times 3, or 4/3 times 3 halves equals 2, which gives you the next octave. The combined effect of addition and multiplication produces a logarithm in mathematics. And as we have seen, the golden proportion is the archetype for this form of growth. And the golden proportion is the archetype for all forms of growth. Plant life, animal life, human life, all evolve or develop in the proportion that's equal to the golden proportion. So the above table expresses the explicit mystery of the law of sound, which is that numbers considered as frequency ratios in the rising scale are equal to the string length for the descending scale. So now you have involution and evolution, descending and ascending. It's interesting too, because when you go into the Bible, when it talks about Jacob, looking at Jacob's ladder, right? Didn't you see angels ascending and descending? I bet you can go in and start looking at numerical factors and you can start figuring out mathematical principles and laws. Certain different tones. Sure, because then what is the true ladder in terms of the human organism? What's the ladder in the human organism? Right, spinal cord. And the different chakras are tuned to a different keynote that relates to a different level of consciousness or different characteristics.
But usually what they were using as metaphor to talk about cosmic principles. And like I say, a cosmic law is true on all levels. So all of them have to follow the same principle. So the law of musical harmony, when viewed from the idea of mediating proportion, becomes a symbol for the law of natural order, the Tao of the created world. Where oppositional yet simultaneous movements interact to create both sound and form. Remember, I started telling you that the key to a metaphysical understanding is being able to reconcile seemingly opposite ideas. You can reconcile them in your mind and understand the difference between the relative truth and the absolute truth. What's the relationship between the two? You can understand that. So then you can understand what is the relevance of where we are in history in terms of this relative relationship to the absolute journey of the whole human evolutionary process. When you can understand that, then you don't get all bent out of shape on the incidences of the present, because you understand the relationship that it has to the whole. Which then kind of goes back to what? A is to B is B is to C. Oh yeah? I'm going to go over what we're going to make up something. And again, I'm trying to show you the purpose of this stuff is to start to hopefully recondition your thinking, where you can think abstractly. Because abstract thinking is the first stage of bridging the gap between the lower mind and higher mind. When you start struggling with abstract ideas, it starts to create a linkage or a bridge with your higher self. And as you keep struggling with these various ideas, it creates like a pipeline that then eventually will activate your intuitive mind, which then will eventually enable you to then have direct connection with your divine mind.
Okay. I don't want to get too technical here, but what keeps running across my mind as we're going into this is, okay, the golden section is, or the golden pot, or whatever, is a length, and you cut it at a place where AB is as the BC.
Right.
And BC is to the whole AC.
Right.
Right?
You understand what he's saying?
And this just sounds like...
He's saying that you have a, basically it comes from this. You take a square, and the square is 1. Take a diagonal from the square, and you drop that diagonal down. And that diagonal will come down like this. And then this line, this is A, and it's really it's more than this. This is probably about here. Like this. This becomes C, this becomes B, this becomes A. So then the ratio A is to B as AB is to BC as BC is to ABC. And so this is 1. And so this ratio then creates phi, which is 1.618 something. Right, which is phi, which is a golden section. And this whole thing is based upon a 3, 4, 5 triangle, which then becomes the basis of pyramids, and then it also, the diagonal here also becomes the basis for an arc, and then the whole mathematical function in the expression of this. And this ratio of proportion is the ratio, because this also then goes into a pentagram, and the pentagram or pentagon is the basic formation of all the various life forms evolve, express itself, grow in proportion to this ratio.
I mean, I think somewhere in what you were saying, I mean, I understand that the, when you went over the pentagram thing and you talk about, I know from here you go to the square root of 5 and then there's something, right?
Right.
That's how you get the pentagram thing.
Right.
You go it's still in the 5 element, but, you know,
Right.
that's again. But, I'm just trying to make the connection between these proportions that you're talking about here and this. You know, again, I'm not trying to get off everything.
Sure.
This sounds like, you know, you can probably solve for it somehow if you really have it mathematics.
Well, get sacred geometry, because he actually works these proportions out geometrically, actually drawing the forms and cutting the angles and doing the arcs and, you know, all the various triangles and angles in there, where you can actually physically do it and get a sense for it. And then he also talks about the philosophical concepts of it, and then gives you examples, and then gives you the mathematical operation of it, so you can see how it works out. This book and the other book was the something with limits. I see the book, I have to get it. But it gave, you know, it had all those examples of the various proportions in the golden section. There was another book too that was that. It was this one. This is probably the prime book here on that.
Where can you get that?
Bodhi Tree. I know Bodhi Tree. We probably need to order some
I got
from
it.
Agenda 2000. You got it from where?
I have it.
Okay.
We went into another section.
I know, so we're going to something else, right? Again, I'm just trying to, my job to first go through is to introduce you to these ideas and concepts and this information, and then hopefully you'll be sparked by some particular area that you want to go into, and then, of course, and like I say, it's a 20-year course, you know, and then after 20 years, you then really be able to really start understanding. Like now, you can pick up stuff and kind of understand it, but you don't really have all the details of why you understand it, but you can understand it. And usually the process is initially you go in and you understand it kind of intuitively, instinctively. And then when you start trying to get into the details, you get confused. And it seems like you're worse off than when you were when you first got in. And then if you stick with it, then it starts to become clearer. But then when it becomes clearer again, it'll be based upon all the facts. And you know why you know. Initially you just can say, yeah, I can see that. But you don't know why you understand it.
This is called relationship, I guess it's called one pattern. The spirit is called given to us. This is what it is. It brings gave us to us.
This here?
Yeah, spirit.
But where did Greece get
Now
there?
I'm trying to learn something new and kind of like keep learning spirit.
So you're saying you're trying to learn something new?
As far as relationship to, you know, like with the calculus, they just give it to you.
Oh, okay. Right.
Now I'm saying, okay, you know.
Where's it based on?
Right, it was based on it.
Right.
Like, here it is, plug it in, talk about it.
Right.
And now I'm trying to get a whole new understanding.
Right. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing is the thing that you have, the thing that we always look at is understand and enjoy the journey. You know, that's why you need to be enjoying what you're doing and not just be doing all this for some pie in the sky or long-term end, because there's no end. There's no end. Because once you reach a certain level, you're going to see something else. Like I said, like when you go climbing here, go out hiking, and I'm going to go up this mountain up here, when you get up there, then you say, dang, there's some more. You get to that one like, oh, wow, there's some more. So you need to be enjoying the trip. And then you don't worry about time, because time is leaving anyway. You got to be immortal, you come back and finish whatever you don't finish now, you just come back and pick it up. That's why they say, what's your passion? Everybody needs to find what their passion is. And that way you enjoy the journey.